The NVIDIA China saga, it continues. Reports say that the tech giant has asked some of its component suppliers to stop production related to its H20 chip made for that country. And that includes Foxconn, Samsung Electronics, and Amkor Technology. And this apparent move, it comes after the Chinese government reportedly told local tech companies to stop buying NVIDIA chips due to alleged security concerns. And this comes as CEO Jensen Huang is in Taiwan today visiting with Taiwan semi officials.
NVIDIA's highly anticipated earnings report's going to be released next week. The stock, though, down more than 4% this week, its worst week since mid-April. Several other mega cap names also sliding over the past couple of days. Joining us right now, Paul Meeks, Freedom Capital Markets Managing Director. Good morning to you. Let's start with the NVIDIA news, what you expect next week. Also, what you make of some of the news that we've been talking about just this past 24 hours about this H20 chip and whether actually it's really going to be sold into China at this point. I think there's some real questions about that.
So first of all, I think the quarter will be another meet and beat. The only problem that I have, or the only cloud that I see, is, of course, what you've already talked about earlier in today's program, which is what's going to happen with China, right? We have the H20. It was on again, off again. We have this reverse tariff of 15% that should be charged or may be charged to both NVIDIA and AMD. And now, of course, we have NVIDIA in negotiations to sell one of their higher powered chips to China. Of course, what will the restrictions on export controls be there? So all this, unfortunately, is a question because it all gets into overall the big negotiations that continue now for an extended 90 days between the U.S. and China. I think they're going to finally strike a deal that is going to be the biggest of all big bundles, includes all this stuff, including other things like who is going to take control of TikTok here in the U.S.
You know, we had a conversation with Sarah Fryer from OpenAI this week where we said this is either a gold rush or a sugar rush. Sam Altman, just about a week ago, said that we were in a bubble. We may be in a bubble, Paul. Are we? And if we are, where in the cycle of the bubble are we so that if you want to get in or out, you know when?
Yeah. Well, we've heard the bubble fears for a long time, right? Remember earlier this year when DeepSeek out of China was out with their cheaper, supposedly more efficient model, and people are calling for peak AI back in early 2025. So yes, we're spending a lot, and yes, in any tech wave, you're always going to have a ending oversupply. But the way I look at it, when you talk about the timing, I still think that we're not close to the end. I still expect strong AI infrastructure building spending this year and even 2026. So I am not necessarily worried about the collapse anytime soon.
But is that a 2-year program? Is that a 5-year program in your mind? Because it also has to do with the multiples that are on these stocks.
Right. I actually think it's clear sailing, at least through next year. But when you take a look at some of these companies, a la, the flagship NVIDIA, when you take a look at a PE to growth, sometimes you see companies of this ilk, this quality, with a PE to growth rate of less than 1, less than 1.5, clearly less than 2. So by that metric, they're not necessarily egregiously overvalued.
There you go. I do want to ask you about NVIDIA. They're in talks with the U.S. government to offer more advanced B38 chips to China. This is following the H20 chips lead. CEO Jensen Huang said the decision is up to the president. It's too early to confirm this. The company asking suppliers to halt H20 production temporarily because China of all people, is raising security concerns about the chips. Wall Street is lifting NVIDIA price targets ahead of earnings next week. The average right now is a record $194. Brenda, obviously next week the story will be NVIDIA. Your thoughts?
So NVIDIA, yes, and to all tech, yes. Look at what happened in Q2 earnings, Cheryl. We saw outperformance. We also saw all these AI hyperscalers, Meta, Microsoft, you name it, have incredible CapEx numbers. These numbers are huge. We're expecting $400 to $500 billion in CapEx by these names in 2026. It's hard to put these numbers into perspective, but this is the size of the Irish or Norwegian economy. And so we're very bullish on tech still. We think that the sector will have 12.5% EPS growth next year. Two other quick points. Number one, the sector in general is very insulated from some of the tariff uncertainty. And we also know that this administration has a strong commitment to U.S. tech. And that is giving me a lot of comfort in coming into some of these names with a PE that's in the high 20s.
Right. Let's talk about NVIDIA. It's the poster child for AI. Is it still the backbone of the AI boom?
Yeah. It absolutely is. And next week, we're going to hear from Jensen Huang. And on Wednesday, when we have this event that's become a quarterly celebration, that's NVIDIA Earnings Day, they're going to keep this AI rally going forward. Now, I will say, David, that a lot of it is baked in. The market does expect to beat. Anything less could actually create capitulation in the market. I think the market is on stilts with NVIDIA propping it up. But at the same time, we've seen these CapEx numbers. We've seen the reporting from the hyperscalers. Yeah. We've heard from the large OEMs. And we know that this movement is going forward. And NVIDIA still has what we're going to call out next week in a new report, about 95% of the market, and will keep about that much market share for the next couple of years.
Wow, for a couple of years. Now, let's start with NVIDIA reportedly looking to halt production of its made-for-China H20 graphic chips. Is coming after China cracked down on purchases. So, Kenny, Dan Newman says NVIDIA is still the backbone of the AI boom. Do you think so as well?
100%. I think, opportunities like this are opportunities to put some more money to work. But yeah, I agree 100% with Dan.
He said, by the way, 95% of the market is going to originate from NVIDIA over the next 2 years. You agree?
I agree. He would know better the exact details, but I agree that the majority is going to emanate from NVIDIA, right?
All right.
Investors are now looking for the next big market catalyst. Could that be NVIDIA results? Out of earnings next week, reports saying that NVIDIA asked suppliers to halt production of its made-for-China chip. Christina Partsinevelos has the latest in today's Tech Check on just what's expected, Christina, and how much China factors in.
China still factors in. I'll get to that percentage. You talked about the halting production. It's specifically the H20 chips designed for China. And this is after Chinese regulators really discouraged local firms from buying them. And this is according to the information. There was more from Reuters. 700,000 chips are now supposedly sitting idle at packaging plants. And that comes just weeks after President Trump reversed his own ban on these exact same AI chips. NVIDIA's China revenue, to your point, Sarah, has already fallen from 26% to 13% of total revenues in just 3 years. But while Wall Street sees this as a China problem for NVIDIA, it's actually accelerating China's move away from NVIDIA and all American suppliers. Chinese companies, for example, now hold 16 of the top 20 spots in open source AI rankings, 80%. According to Artificial Analysis. The U.S. just has 3 in the open source models, and they're building these models to run on Chinese hardware. Take DeepSeek's delayed R2 model. Markets saw the Huawei chip issues as bullish for NVIDIA because it couldn't work on Huawei. But sources tell me that's the wrong read. DeepSeek had to train R2 on NVIDIA chips because Huawei's software issues, but they're still planning to run the finished model on Huawei chips. The key insight, training happens periodically, but inference happens millions of times. And if developers build apps on these Chinese AI models, they'll be running on Chinese hardware. And that's what worries NVIDIA. It's not just DeepSeek. Tech giant Baidu built its Ernie model specifically for Huawei chips. Z.ai is doing the same. China is systematically building out an AI ecosystem that doesn't need NVIDIA. So while NVIDIA gets squeezed between Washington's restrictions and Beijing's security concerns, China is solving its chip dependency problem. NVIDIA's earnings next week will show the near-term impact, but the real threat is China building an entire AI ecosystem that doesn't need NVIDIA at all.
NVIDIA reportedly hitting pause on production of its H20 AI chip designed specifically for the Chinese market. According to the information, that's the company that has released, it's instructed key suppliers like Samsung to stop any work related to this H20 chip. Now, the stock is up today because the entire market is up on this rally, and tech really sold off this week. But this is a move that's coming after Chinese officials officials urged local companies to avoid using the chip among ongoing tensions between D.C. and Beijing. And that is really interesting.
Well,
if everyone's excited about NVIDIA because they're sending this low-end chip over to China, but China all of a sudden says, hey, let's boycott this.
This is mostly kabuki theater. They've talked about what Lutnick said about their dependency and their addiction to NVIDIA, which was, to be quite honest, it was a more of a Peter Navarro type move. And, maybe, considering how President Trump has been negotiating with Xi, and he's always sort of complimentary, even though he says we have to go at this, we're both trying to do the best for our countries. I think it was an unforced error on Lutnick's part, but it won't change a thing because this is not just H20s, but we're talking further on. I mean, these are intense negotiations that are going on right now. This is a small part of it. And what do you do with Blackwell? What do you do with the next chip after that? Of course, we want to do business with China, but we also want to make sure that they don't ever have enough computing power to decode our nuclear submarines, right? And so I think this is just mostly for public consumption, and I wouldn't be surprised if we hear some major official deal on this probably next week. By the way, NVIDIA's earnings next week will be a bigger event than Powell was today.
I agree with Charles. We went through this with the 5G boom with smartphones. The Chinese said they didn't want U.S. tech, but in the headlines, but they were actually trying to scoop it up through Avago for RF front end. So I think it's a similar play out. They need this technology.
All right, I hope you're all doing great today. Just about the entire market is higher at the time. I'm recording after Powell signaled this morning that we will most likely get a September rate cut. Now we have a lot of news to talk about when it comes to NVIDIA. First, the information is reporting that NVIDIA has ordered Samsung and Amkor to stop production of H20 components. I will be completely honest. I don't know if this story is correct or not, and the information has been very unreliable over the past year or so when it comes to accurately reporting on NVIDIA rumors. So that is worth bearing in mind. That being said, we also have a report from Reuters saying that NVIDIA has asked Foxconn to stop work related to H20 production, according to 2 unnamed sources. In that same report, Reuters said that a third source told them that NVIDIA simply wants to work through its existing H20 inventory first. So maybe that's all that's happening here. Additionally, there have been multiple reports this summer from both Reuters and the Financial Times saying that NVIDIA is working to deliver samples of a new chip to customers in China as soon as this September. When asked about the rumored B38 chip today in Taiwan, Jensen did not deny it and said that it is up to the U.S. government and that NVIDIA is in dialogue with them to offer a new chip in China, but it's too soon to know. When asked about NVIDIA ordering a halt of H20 production due to security concerns in China, Jensen said that the H20 has no security backdoors. And when asked if NVIDIA had asked suppliers to halt H20 production, Jensen told reporters that they have a significant number of H20 chips prepared and are now waiting for purchase orders from China customers. So perhaps NVIDIA is simply trying to work through some of their existing inventory first. That's what it sounds like, at least. Now, as I mentioned in yesterday's video, after we got the news that Chinese officials were offended by the U.S. Commerce Secretary comments last month, and therefore they are looking for ways to urge companies to avoid NVIDIA chips. As I said in yesterday's video, I don't think this changes anything for NVIDIA. I honestly think this is just more of the back and forth trade dispute between the US and China. While Huawei does have some competitive hardware offerings compared to the H20, NVIDIA's software offering in CUDA is by far the preferred choice by most developers in China. As I've said so many times on this channel, CUDA is massively beneficial to NVIDIA, keeping customers within the NVIDIA ecosystem, and it does not get enough attention. And while China is trying to create their own AI ecosystem that is not relying on NVIDIA, the reality is that they need NVIDIA at this current moment in order to stay competitive in the AI race. At least for the current moment, there is no way around this fact. I think Charles Payne made a great point today, saying this is just a small piece of a broader trade negotiation between the US and China that will likely be resolved in the near future. And who knows, perhaps China is claiming to reject the H20 in hopes that the US will allow a better chip to be sold into the Chinese market in order to keep Chinese developers building on the American tech stack. I don't know. Overall, I do not view this situation as problematic for NVIDIA in the grand scheme of things, and I think this whole situation will eventually be resolved. Also, since I mentioned Jensen's visit to Taiwan, Jensen said the reason he was visiting Taiwan was to thank the workers at TSMC, saying, quote, "We have a next-generation architecture called Rubin. Rubin is very advanced. We have now taped out 6 brand new chips to TSMC." He also said this is the first architecture in NVIDIA's history where every single chip is new and revolutionary. As a reminder, NVIDIA's Vera Rubin is expected to launch in 2026. NVIDIA recently told CNBC that Rubin is on track, and as Jensen mentioned, this is the first architecture wherein each chip is new and custom designed for NVIDIA. This is a big deal. As I've said a lot recently, the Vera CPU will be NVIDIA's first custom CPU containing 88 NVIDIA Olympus cores built to work in lockstep with NVIDIA GPUs. And notice that NVIDIA is taking their holistic system approach even further with Rubin. One of the reasons that NVIDIA is so far ahead of their competition is that they take a total system approach. approach, driving efficiencies at every component of the system, not just the GPU. I'm looking forward to NVIDIA's earnings next week. Remember that we should not see any H20 revenue in NVIDIA's earnings for the quarter, but we could start to see some H20 revenue show up in NVIDIA's next quarter guidance. The two main points of focus on NVIDIA's earnings call next week will likely be margins, specifically margin guidance, and NVIDIA's China strategy. Very briefly, I want to remind you that NVIDIA's margin on the H20 was already lower than their main data center products, even before the 15% revenue cut to the U.S. government. H20 margins are estimated to have been somewhere in the range of 50 to 70% before the 15% revenue cut to the U.S. government. Based on this estimate, if NVIDIA does not raise prices in China, then we're looking at H20 margins in the range of roughly 35 to 55%. However, if NVIDIA raises H20 prices by 18%, as is being reported, then that would likely bring H20 margins up to somewhere in the range of 42 to 60%. That's lower than the estimated 50 to 70% they were getting prior to the U.S. government's 15% revenue cut. And that's even after accounting for an 18% price increase on the H20. And so, if margins on the H20 turn out to be lower than they were previously, we could reasonably see NVIDIA's overall gross margins a percentage point or two lower in future quarters than otherwise would have been. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when we're talking about tens of billions of dollars in revenue per quarter, a percentage point or two difference on gross margins actually adds up to quite a large amount of money. Now, I don't know how the market will react to NVIDIA's earnings on the 27th, but margins, and more importantly margin guidance, will be a key focus of market participants. While there are still a lot of unanswered questions about margins, H20 production, a new China chip, and so on, I continue to be bullish on NVIDIA long term, and I seriously think there is plenty of runway ahead. I think we're likely to see a surge in compute demand in the near future fueled by the introduction of agentic AI to the general public. I think this surge in compute demand will likely extend well into 2026. I think 2026 will be another growth year for NVIDIA. And beyond that, we have a clear data center product roadmap extending into 2028 with a new generation product release each year. Blackwell Ultra has launched and should ramp substantially in September. I'm sure that will be another key topic on next week's earnings call. After that, we have Vera Rubin in 2026, Rubin Ultra in 2027 with 576 Rubin GPU dies in a single Kyber rack. That's 4 times as many GPU dies as the current Blackwell systems. And then we have Feynman in 2028. And Jensen thinks the world's computing CapEx will reach $1 trillion annually by 2030, meaning he's expecting an expanding total addressable market and growing AI demand underpinning all of this. I seriously think we are still in the early days of AI, and I expect NVIDIA to be worth substantially more in future years than it is today. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.